Okay, we're ready.
All right. I would now like to call the June 21st, 2023 Longmont Sustainability Advisory Board meeting to order. Could we please start with a roll call?
Yes. Kate Collardson.
Here.
Jim Metcalf.
I'm here.
Mary Lynn.
Here.
Michelle Roth.
Here.
Charles Musgrave.
I'm here.
Robert Davidson said he would be joining us a little late tonight, and Ralph Grosswald.
Here.
Let's see, Lisa is going to be joining a little late. We don't have Becky here. We have Eliana Lands or Lons.
It's Lands.
Okay. And Heather McIntyre is here, and Councilmember Martin.
Here.
All right, and our public who is joining us today is Sarah Bolton. She is just observing for a class that she's taking. So, Chair, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. I'll read our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the First Peoples have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. And now I'll read our inclusion statement. The Sustainability Advisory Board embraces diverse perspectives from its members and the public. To create an inclusive space where everyone feels welcome to share their opinion, the board asks that all attendees listen and speak with respect and avoid attacks on individuals or specific group identities. And that brings us to approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Did anyone have any revisions? If none, is there a motion to approve?
I will move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I can second that.
Great. All in favor? Aye.
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 And the minutes are approved. Thanks. Are there any revisions to the agenda from the staff?
So
Jim.
Heather recommended that I bring this up now. Charles and I worked on a statement regarding composting, and I think we have a nice draft that we'd like to share with people. And so Heather's going to send it once we turn it into a Word document, because we can't do Google Docs. But Heather will send it out to everybody so that you guys can have a look at it, and then maybe we can talk about it at the next meeting. So
Fantastic.
that's, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Just a small agenda revision. I just want to add to the end items from staff, reference to the email that Heather sent earlier, calling again for volunteers for the heat mapping project. So I just want a little bit of space to chat more about that.
Great. Okay. That takes us to general business, and Lisa, you're on.
Woohoo. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late. It's been a busy afternoon. I just wanted to go through, I was hoping this would be done by this meeting, but it's not, but that's okay. We had a pretty open agenda. And so I wanted to be able to spend some time going over where things are at with the climate risk and resilience tool, and Zoom is going to do a weird thing for me. Sorry. Okay. I'm not sure what's happening. I can see half of my face. So if you all have questions or anything, please just jump in, because I don't think I can see everything that's happening. But can you all see the my screen? Okay. Thumbs up.
Yes.
Charles? Okay, great. So this is the landing page for the story map. So we have two components of the risk and resilience tool. There's the story map side that I'll run through, and then there's an interactive map that we like to call the choose your own adventure side. And you all have seen previous versions of this, but this is the close to final version. So we've reformatted things quite a bit to make it more, I think, user-friendly, because there's a lot of content in here. So there's an introduction part that talks about climate hazards and what does vulnerability and climate exposures mean, and how risk is really incorporating vulnerability into climate exposure. There's a video about how to use the tool. So it digs a little bit deeper so people can kind of understand the different components, looking at both the overall risk data, the vulnerability data, and then, future data. Some key findings, and this might be changed a little bit because this is kind of a lot of content, but that just sort of shows like overall, what are the neighborhoods that we're seeing that have the highest risk based on, again, those climate exposures and different vulnerability data. We're seeing that aligns with the higher rates of people of color, people in poverty, lowest median income, lower tree canopy. And so what does that kind of mean for us in terms of focusing our efforts to increase resilience to the impacts of climate change? And then it organizes the data itself into risk data and then the vulnerability data. So we looked at 4 primary climate exposures: extreme heat, extreme cold, poor air quality, and flooding. We do also link to the wildfire map that the city uses. There was a lot more complexity in doing this level of analysis on wildfire. And so that kind of ended up becoming out of the scope of this project, but we link to the wildfire mapping tool out of, I think it's CSU. I'll pull it up in a minute, so that there's still reference to that, but it became too much for us to do the neighborhood level overall vulnerability score that you'll see in the other exposures. So the first is extreme heat. As you can see, it breaks it down by neighborhood. And so, and then it has a risk score that you can see broken down into these percentiles. Some of the neighborhoods don't show up because you just have to, this, so I can scroll in a little bit. Some of them you just have to zoom in on, and then the neighborhood name will pop up. And then you can click on one of the neighborhoods and it'll show you kind of the overall risk score for that risk. So for extreme heat, the neighborhood count, and then it looks at the tree canopy cover because that's one of the key measures for extreme heat. And then in this one, and this is something that we'll build out over time. So you'll see this like icon that says community story locations. And so there's this little bubble here. So we have one community story that's embedded into this map. And I'll pull that up, let's see. So it goes into a really nice edited video of one of our community members telling their story about their experience with extreme heat in their community. And so we hope to build that out so that we'll have stories from across the community kind of being for people to be able to really humanize and relate kind of what we're telling people in the data with people's real experiences on the ground in different neighborhoods. Extreme cold. So similarly, you've broken down by neighborhoods. It tells you overall what different data sets went into creating the overall risk score for air quality and the different factors that went into calculating that. And then flooding similarly. And then so this is where we landed in terms of wildfire risk, is talking about where fire risk is the highest, and then linking to this essentially portal that takes you out of this site, but then it takes you to an interactive, you have to go through a couple of steps, but then you can zoom in on Longmont, and it gives you kind of the breakdown of this wildfire risk right here. And then in each of these, at the end, there's a map, there's a link to the interactive map. There should be. Well, I don't know why that link isn't working right now. But that's the link that takes you to the map that you all have seen previously. That hasn't changed a lot. It's essentially where all of the data layers live, and you can turn them on and off based on what you want to see. It'll be really useful for staff in particular, or members of the community. You can input your own data and then download your own maps kind of based on, so if we want to look at any utility infrastructure overlay with any number of climate risk or vulnerability factors, we can turn on and off all of those layers based on what piece of information we're trying to get at, or to help us prioritize decision making or infrastructure improvements or whatever it might be. And then it goes into all of the vulnerability data. So we have economic vulnerability. Again, that's broken down by neighborhood. So you'll see that that encompasses median household income, population using food stamps, population in poverty, people without a four-year degree, and population of outdoor workers. Social vulnerability, you'll see the different factors that encapsulate that. Housing vulnerability, people paying more than 30% towards rent, homes without a vehicle, homes without a computer, percentage of mobile homes, and then homes without heating. You'll see there's some neighborhoods where we didn't have enough data, or we had too few households to appropriately aggregate the data to show the scores for those areas. And then health vulnerability, so a number of different health factors that we looked at there. And then this goes into future climate exposures. And this has been an interesting process. So Boulder County worked with a consulting group called Resilient Analytics to look at potential future climate risk based on a number of different scenarios. We worked to try to put that into map form, but there was too much differentiation between the way that we were calculating things on the neighborhood level and how we could then appropriately extrapolate that for future conditions. And so what we ended up doing was kind of utilizing this graphic to just explain two different scenarios, which are RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5, which is essentially just to say worst case scenario, best case scenario, based on a number of different potential future projections of climate impacts, what we might see, if we don't do a great job curbing our emissions, we're going to see the worst impacts. And this is what we might see in terms of extreme weather or sea level rise. Obviously, we're not going to face sea level rise or cost for adaptation. And they're still working on this piece of how to adapt this particularly to Longmont. So there's some narrative content around what we expect to see in the future around extreme heat, extreme cold, and poor air quality. And then it looks at what's called adaptive capacity. And so that's an important component for us to consider, not just what the potential risk that a neighborhood is facing, but also any number of assets that community might have to draw on for resilience. And so we know that even though neighborhoods might face a lot of those vulnerability indicators, so economic, social, housing, and health, we know that folks also have really strong resilience within their communities, and that allows for greater what's called adaptive capacity. So their ability to adapt to those impacts of climate change in less extreme and negative ways. And we also want to make sure that that's part of the story, so that we're also not looking at neighborhoods solely through that like deficit lens of here's all the ways that this neighborhood is vulnerable to these risks, but here are the strengths that these neighborhoods have, and that we can really be building up those resources and helping increase neighborhood resilience to the impacts of climate change. And so there's some qualitative scoring of neighborhood resources. So we look at the different community resources that are available, and there's a methodology document that goes along with this, that people that want to really dig into what each of these pieces are. And then there's a number of maps kind of showing different aspects of those adaptive capacity resources and percentage of neighborhoods living kind of, or this one is community resources and percent of neighborhoods living below the poverty line, and why that's really important in the context of resilience to climate impacts. And so it goes through a number of these comparisons. Community resources and folks without a college degree, and community resources and limited English. And so you'll see this graph, this little box chart on the bottom left here that kind of shows, you know, really where we want to focus our neighborhoods that have we know are at high risk for climate impacts, but also have a lower count of community resources and lower adaptive capacity, at least in terms of prioritizing our work around resilience. People with a disability, population under 5, folks over 64. And then there's a section that's focused on recommendations and additional resources. So we talk about, these are just some nice graphics of how climate change increases rising temperatures, how climate change influences air quality and wildfires, and then just resources for additional resources for people. And there's quite a bit that's built into there. And then this is just a reference map. This is included on the interactive map. That's a helpful layer to turn on and off to show where our map aligns with the Colorado Enviro screen, which if folks are familiar with that, that's a statewide similar mapping tool that looks specifically at environmental justice and health. And so you can really see how the communities or the neighborhoods that have been identified in the Colorado Enviro screen map pretty well align with the neighborhoods that we've identified as more risk for climate impacts. So that is it. I wish I could show you. I'm sorry. I'll stop sharing for a second and see if I can pull up the other map, the interactive map, but I usually just link it through that one. So while I'm doing that, if folks have any questions or comments, we are working to wrap this up in the next couple weeks, and then get it, you know, published for the public to view, and then working, as I said, on building out those community stories over time. So this has been a really great process for us. It's been a collaborative project that we've had folks from, you know, across the organization working on. And then once we have this internally, we'll also circle through with a number of work groups to just train people on how to use the tool, what it is, what's there. Some of the constraints I think about, you know, not wanting to make too many assumptions about how things show up, but this is a really one piece of information that we can use when we're talking about different types of work that the city is doing and how we can look at different opportunities to increase climate resilience while we're doing, you know, infrastructure work or anything that we might be able to really leverage, and then from a programmatic and policy scale as well. So, yeah, Jim.
So it's really interesting. Really interesting to see how disparate some of these measurements are across not an enormous city. I, I've had some experience with some of these kind of like ARC or GIS based web platforms, you know, where you can look in these maps, and they're really nice because you can do a lot of things with the maps, but I find that they're incredibly difficult to use on mobile devices. And I know that a lot of people, that's their main internet access. I just didn't know if the site was going to be tested on mobile devices, especially if we want to make sure that people at the lower end of the income spectrum usually get their internet access on mobile devices. And I didn't know if that's one place it was going to be tested, or if there could be some alternate subset of simplified maps that could be made available.
That's a great,
as well.
yeah, that's a great question, Jim. I will put that on my list to double check. I know we had talked about it early on, and I don't know if we've circled back to it. So I will definitely ask that. It will be translated. There's a button that you can click to see everything in Spanish. But I'll definitely ask about the mobile capacity, because that's a really good question. Thank you. Charles.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. That was a really nice explanation, description of this tool, and it looks like it is really powerful and can be really useful. So I was wondering about, I could see how it could be really helpful for helping the community understand and appreciate the risks and how they're climate risks and how they're distributed across the city and all that. That's really fantastic. I wondered more about like is there a plan for like how to make sure the community knows about this tool and how to get them to engage with it and use it, and because it's be a shame to have a fantastic tool that the community doesn't actually use.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't say there's a written plan yet. We're trying to get it done first, and we have a loose communications plan in terms of places that we want to circulate it to. And I agree. I think, we've been engaging with the Equitable Climate Action Team and the Neighborhood Group Leaders Association, which are both good groups to help get information out. But we will be more intentional about that once it's done. I'm going to make a note for myself. And then I also just want to note that we do want the information to be out in the community to be able to use it. And we also want to be mindful of the messaging that this isn't then put on the community to say you all should go solve the issues in your neighborhood around climate resilience. Like, it's important for people to be aware of, and there's capacity building that can be done through that information. And it's also a really important tool for us to understand internally for when we are looking at projects and programs and different things that, that we are looking at how, like, what's the next steps for the city in terms of building resilience in, across our community, but particularly for those neighborhoods that we know are at most risk. And so one of the things that our community and neighborhood resources folks are working on are neighborhood resilience plans, and that encompasses a lot of components of resilience, not just climate resilience, but we'll be working with them on that project to be making sure that we're incorporating aspects of climate resilience as they're sort of looking at that broader picture that they're using ARPA funds for. So it's a tool both for the public, but also for us as staff.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Mary Lynn, Mary, did you have a?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you, so this map, it looks at tree canopy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are there any other life-based measures of sustainability, for example, of density of vegetation, soil health, adjacency to riparian areas? That's my first question. Adjacent to local food, access to grow food, permaculture. And the second question is, does it map at all the more sustainable types of housing? For example, in the historic downtown, houses have porches around them that have been shown to significantly decrease the impact of sun to keep the houses cooler. dog trot homes and homes with courtyards are able to allow air passage so that you don't have to cool homes. Large masses of conjoined homes are very, very difficult to cool, even though they may be easier to warm. But if the concern is about warmth, then why aren't we advocating for the types of architecture that are easier to cool and keep cool and that integrate more effectively with the natural world? So I'm asking about life-based and architecture-based. And then my third question would be, I'll ask my third question if we get through those.
Sorry, I was just taking some notes for myself. Those are great questions. Thank you. In the interactive map, which I'm sorry I can't pull up right now, it has a breakdown of not just tree canopy, but land cover by different components of land cover. So looking at impervious and pervious surfaces and different types of vegetation. There's detailed data layers in there, and I don't remember off the top of my head to what degree those go into there. The reason tree canopy is called out is because in the methodology and looking at extreme heat, we know tree canopy plays a big role in that. The project that I will talk to you all about toward the end, which I've mentioned before, is that real-time heat mapping that we're going to be doing this summer, which will give us. So this is a snapshot based on a bunch of data that we have already. What the real-time heat mapping will allow us to do is map the entire community and see what the heat differential is in different areas that then allow us to see what are the factors that contribute to that heat differential. And I think some of the other components that you're bringing up, I think will show up in part of that conversation of, why is this area hotter or cooler by what degree than this other area? I don't, off the top of my head, recall if there's other life-based indicators that are kind of rolled up in the overall risk scores, but I need to take a look back at that. That's a great point about different types of architecture. There's definitely different, as you're mentioning, different ways in which we can build things that, help or don't help especially from an extreme heat standpoint. And those are things that I think we are going to need to be looking at. And that's not an uncomplicated conversation as we're also looking at housing affordability and things like that. And I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. So I want to be careful about that. But I also want to say those are really complex issues that we need to be looking at together. So, when we're looking at creating a sustainable community, that's a community that people can afford to live and a community that is built ideally in more harmony with our natural environment. And so what are the things that we might need to either look at from an architecture standpoint or a mitigation standpoint if we can't do some of those things to make sure that we are doing what we can do in our regional and climate context to mitigate extreme heat. But that's a great point. What we do have is a layer that's done essentially just housing stock. So we have areas that we know are single family homes versus, multifamily homes. And we know that there's impacts as far as, vegetation and open space and all of those things, in addition to parking lots and all of the other impervious surface that we know impacts that as well.
So landscape architecture is equally as important, having permeable surfaces that actually can be green. So for example, parking lots that are not asphalt, but are interspersed brick pavers and growing things, that actually helps to build the soil. It increases the green, it retains water, which means more transpiration and cooling through those effects and so forth. Yeah, I think that, and you can actually include that in a soil health analysis, inches of soil as carbon capture, which is the most important carbon capture reservoir reservoir for capture of carbon on the planet. And yeah, as you said, this is complex, but there are a lot of sort of easy wins that the city could be going for that are life-based, like soil-based, and even considering the soil that's in a parking lot, if you have permeable and mixed planting sources, like they do in Europe. They have a large square that's got grass or weeds growing in it, and then bricks around it to maintain some structure so that it doesn't fall apart. I would like to see more of that happening, and I'd like to see there's some incentives built into the city zoning codes for creating buildings that have more natural cooling factors, like I had just mentioned.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Those are great points. And I think that points to kind of the next steps, kind of once this piece is done and once we get that real-time heat mapping, is how do we start to look at appropriate cooling solutions as well. And there's going to be a broad swath of things that we're going to need to consider in that. Thank you. Those are great points. Any other? Yeah, Jim.
I'm never sure if I should use a little raise hand thing. So one of the things that's really cool about these maps is that they show these neighborhood by neighborhood pieces of detail, and I think that's really, really important. But there are a lot of climate things that are just going to kind of hammer the whole town. And if we're talking about agriculture, of course, especially in the Mountain West, agriculture is going to get really, really hammered by climate change. We know that we're already, irrigation dependent. If we really want to grow anything, that's going to be even worse. Is this interface going to have things that are kind of more general like that as well, or is this really going to be focused on kind of the neighborhood resiliency issues as opposed to these things which would apply to somebody in Fort Collins or somebody in Loveland or Boulder or something like that?
Yeah. So this tool itself is looking at those 4 exposures that we know as a region we're going to be more likely to face. We didn't include drought in that. We know that that's another big component. It just wasn't within the scope of this project. It is something that the county is looking at in a similar project. And so because they were kind of doing that, and that is a regional issue, we didn't incorporate it into this project. This is really looking at neighborhood by neighborhood. What are the really, a lot of those risks are things that the entire community is going to feel, but some people are going to be impacted by them in more extreme ways because of those other factors of, economics and health and housing and those sorts of factors. Other than flooding is kind of the one where, we know that probably not the entire community is going to be impacted by that directly. Indirectly, if there's a flood, as we saw in 2013, that impacts the entire community, but in terms of flood zones. So that's really kind of how we're looking at those overarching exposures. But that's the cool thing about this, cool but challenging, I would say, is that we started this project, and I'm not going to say we're like the forerunner in this because there's a lot of folks doing great work, but so many mapping tools have emerged in the last year or 2 years, looking at all kinds of aspects of climate change, and they're all on different scales. And one of the things I've started to do is just try to collect what all of those are, because hopefully we can use them in a synthesized strategic way to where if this map doesn't cover something, we have another resource that touches on some of those other things. There's one that looks more broadly at hazards. There's ones that look specifically at, potential cost impacts. There's one where you can type in your address and it'll pull up sort of what's the risk factor of your particular house. So I'm just trying to collect what all of those resources are, because there's a ton of things happening in this space right now on multiple levels and from multiple sources. Yeah, Mary.
So one of the issues that's sort of on rarely discussed elephant in the room in the Southwest where we live, and I experienced this for the 2 decades that I lived in Arizona, is that there is unclarity and hesitancy to engage with the topic on the part of municipalities and large entities that own, many acre facilities, to engage with the issue of rainwater capture because there's concern about the implications for water rights. However, what I've learned is that water rights actually do, and this is from landscape architects who designed this into large, 100, 200 acre properties and who work with cities, is that water rights are actually do allow rainwater capture, especially if the rainwater is then released back in, for example, a landscape setting, or if it's, cleaned up, used for human consumption, and then released in a gray water context. So the majority goes back to the land. It's surprising to me that after all of this time that there's so little attention paid to the water that just comes right out of the sky for us, that we could be using for growing soil, for creating green and sustainable and cool landscaping and so forth. And I would really like to encourage the city to address this. In the current map, it's going to show 0. You're not going to show anybody who's got appropriate rainwater capture. It's not part of our culture, but I would like to encourage the development of awareness of the possibilities in that regard.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a ton of things that people can do on their own property, absolutely, to help capture in a way that isn't just you have a barrel. There's lots of things you can do within your own landscape to capture and filter rainwater. There's actually, if I can find it readily, I will send it to you all. The city of Boulder is bringing Brad Lancaster.
Right, I know Brad. I brought him in when I was at Prescott College. He was actually, he taught many courses there on this. Yeah, he primarily focuses on creating topological sculpturing so that water is retained. But I could also bring in, if people are interested, a landscape architect, Barnabas Kane, who did landscape, who designed a good part of the landscape architecture for Prescott College. And he knows quite a bit about actually capturing your year's water and then how to use it in such a way that you get multiple use from it. And he understands the code and he advises quite confidently on that. He actually spoke to our local permaculture group here in Longmont. So if there's interest, I think you would find it very interesting to hear what Barnabas has to say. So I'd like to offer that as well. And I could send his information to Heather to send to the board.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not familiar with that person, so I'd love to look at that. And I'm happy to share the information on, like I said, I think Boulder is bringing Brad Lancaster here sometime in the not too distant future. If people,
I think it's in the next couple of days, or it's tonight or something. It's very soon and it's free. It's very soon.
I'll see if I can pull it up while we're chatting.
Okay.
And then that kind of stuff would fall into, Hope Bartlett's realm. And so we are, she chatted with you all last month about the city is kicking off the update to our water efficiency master plan. And so I think a lot of that would be appropriate to look at incorporating into that plan and the recommendations of how can the city help educate and promote different aspects of water conservation within the city. Did I see another hand, Jim? Yeah.
Just as an aside, the Sustainable Neighborhood Grant Program has funded some rain barrel education and installation projects. And so if anybody is in a neighborhood and would want to apply for some of those are the one we did reviewed very well. They had a really nice little program, but that's actually a really good use of the Sustainability Grant Program since rain barrels are now legal. So
how do we find out about that, Jim?
I can have Heather send the website around.
Okay.
And I believe the website also has, I'll find it, but it also has some of the examples of the proposals that people have submitted. But yeah, I can just have Heather do that. One of the frustrations I have that we can't do with it right now is that you have to have a neighborhood group to do this. And I live in a neighborhood that does not have a neighborhood group. So I need to start a neighborhood group before I can do this.
Right.
But anyways, other people might be in better situations. but
Well,
it's a great use. So
I think we should also look at the code, because rain barrels, you know, a 50, you know, gallon or an 80-gallon rain barrel, that's a tiny literal drop in the bucket of the 3,000 gallons that we could be collecting multiple times a year, and again would contribute towards all of the water needs of a household. And there's no reason why that couldn't be included in code, so that they could be, you know, tastefully included underground or in an outbuilding and such, so that you don't look quite like the Australian outback in historic Old Town.
I do want to say, and I don't want to speak out of turn, it might, when Hope comes back to revisit with you all as she's going through the water efficiency master plan, these are some good questions to bring up to her. I know Marcia served on the water board, and so she might have more information. I'm pretty sure some of that is state regulated, and that the city cannot supersede that. So I believe the state allows 2 50-gallon rain barrels on your property. It does not regulate how you can capture rainwater in other ways through your landscape, by swales and mulch basins and different aspects like that. But I want to be mindful, there are some things we can do with code and there are some things we can't, because water rights are on a different level. Marcia, I saw you unmute. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, I unmuted because you called me in, but yes, that's what you said is essentially correct. That state water law is state water law, and it was a big deal that our 2 50-gallon rain barrels were allowed. That almost didn't pass. So, you know, it means that you can have you can essentially, with careful landscaping, you can keep your vegetation in a typical yard, but we're not talking about major retention because our downstream contribution is regulated pretty strictly.
Thanks, Marcia.
I just want to say that's why we should bring in a Barnabas, because he has a different interpretation of things that you may consider controversial. We may decide that we want to front this as a legislative priority to have this changed, but I think it's worthwhile to speak to folks in the industry who have different understandings of how you can work with those laws, but I'll send his information out.
Thanks, Mary. So the Brad Lancaster presentation is Thursday, June 29th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the Boulder JCC Levin Hall. Boulder JCC Levin Hall. Thursday, the 29th at 7 p.m. If you all want to check that out.
There is they do ask that you register.
Oh, thanks, Kate. I didn't scroll down to the bottom of the page.
So, I mean, one of us will send this over to Heather to distribute it.
Yeah, I'll drop it to Heather now. And then I do also just want to say thanks to Jim for plugging the Sustainable Neighborhood Solutions grant opportunity. Yes, that currently is available to registered neighborhood groups. But if your neighborhood is not a registered group and you want to become one, you can also organize your neighborhood around that. It is not an HOA requirement. It is a registered neighborhood group. So that can look in any number of ways. And we can get the information to you all about that. It's a city program that we run in collaboration with the Longmont Community Foundation. That's run out of our community and neighborhood resources group. Mary.
Just a quick question about that. Doesn't every neighborhood have a neighborhood association?
Nope.
Ugh,
It
there's
doesn't.
like 36 of them, but how many neighborhoods do we have that are unrepresented?
Oh, no, there's many more than that. Yeah, so I think and then NGLA, I think there are somewhere around 60 registered neighborhood
Wow.
groups, and that does not represent the entire city. That's still a pretty new program. So I know I've chatted about it a few times, but just for a refresher, it's a grant opportunity for neighborhood groups to do sustainable projects within their neighborhoods. We've done rain gardens, pollinator gardens, rain barrel building workshop, educational workshops. There's been a number of things that have come through for a lot of stuff around water conservation and pollinators and xeric landscaping and things like that. It's still pretty small at this point in time, and the hope is to build that over time to have, people that can apply for bigger types of projects and for that to be available to other types of groups in the community. But we're, still building the program and getting the word out there and stuff. But it's an exciting opportunity for folks and a good opportunity to connect with your neighbors around sustainability. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, just about the neighborhood. Do I just check on the website? Is that on the city website to like see if your neighborhood's registered?
Yeah, I'll get you all some information on that.
That would be great.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
Appreciate all the work you've done on this. It looks great.
Thank you. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of awesome feedback, and I think it's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited to start using it, and we've gotten great feedback from everybody who's seen it so far. It's really a lot more comprehensive than a lot of the other tools too, and so I'm hoping that it can be useful in the ways that we hope for it to. So great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Well, that is it for me.
Well, but it's not it for you.
Oh, and next
We don't have anyone from the public to be heard.
Okay.
And unless there is anyone with other business, then you are up next.
Anyone with other business? No. Okay. Well, I just wanted to put in another plugin. So our community heat mapping project, which I mentioned before. So we have this map now. We think heat risk looks like this based on the information we have, but we also think it's really important to do that real-time data collection so that we can see what those differentials are across our community. And we are looking for volunteers to do that mapping work. And we have had a hard time. I thought people would really jump at this opportunity. And a lot of folks have expressed interest. And then as we're trying to pin people down, we haven't been able to pin them down. So putting a call out to you all again. If anyone is interested in volunteering for that. Charles, did you have a question or are you volunteering?
Is that July 8th? Is that correct? Did I remember that right?
That was the date we had initially identified. It looks like we might be bumping that to July 13th. So part of the challenge has been we are watching the weather and looking at the forecasting, and all the stars have to align for it to be a good day. So there's a couple of challenges we've had. So it's probably going to be either July 8th or July 13th. I know that makes it hard for you to commit to something, but there's 3 time slots. Ideally, we'd have someone that would commit to all 3, but it's also okay if you can't do that. There's a 6 a.m., 3 p.m., and a 7 p.m. And it's about an hour per route, and we have 6 routes. So we're looking for ideally 2 people per route, 1 to drive and 1 to navigate, and we'll set you up with all the equipment and everything like that. So it's about a 4 to 5 hour commitment on a Saturday is what we're looking at. So, and then there's a training about a week ahead of time that'll be an hour or 2. But yeah, Ralph.
That was my question, was about the training. Is that at a set time, or is that something that's a video that can be done, on your own? Could you just give us a little more of an understanding about the preparation that would be necessary if we can get free on the dates?
The consultants we're working with do a training about a week ahead of time. I will be honest and tell you, I don't know what all the details of that training entail, so I can't speak to that. That's a great question of whether it can be a video. I can ask that question, but I'm not sure. I know right now they've been saying that we'll probably do a training a week ahead of time, and it'll probably be about an hour that people can anticipate. Zach, who's our main lead on that project, is out of town right now. Normally he's on these meetings, so I can't tap him to answer that question.
So, and there hasn't been a set time that's been published yet either?
No, because we're waiting on scheduling this actual day. So lots of moving pieces that make this challenging for us.
Okay.
I filled out the question, so Zach sends you a questionnaire if you want to do it. And
Mhm.
one thing about it is that it's not decided yet whether or not the training will be in person or remote. And so that also could change people's,
Gotcha.
one of the questions you answer is whether or not you prefer it to be in person or remote. And so in terms of, if it can be done remotely, that of course free up time of travel for
Yeah.
a lot of people.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So does anyone want to jump in on an opportunity with not phenomenal details available? I know it's summer and it's hard to pin people down. We have a fallback. If we can't get community volunteers, we will pull staff in to do it, which is fine. But we also thought it would be a fun volunteer opportunity for folks, but that's okay if y'all can't come in. Well, if you wake up tomorrow and decide you've changed your mind, please reach out to me.
I'll make a sweet playlist for anybody who's in the car with me.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. We'll have snacks. We'll have good snacks, I promise. We'll have coffee for early birds. Well, with that, I'm done. Kate.
I'm not sure that you actually are.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Public service recognition bags.
Oh, yes. I might tap Heather to jump in on that. Heather. Oh, where'd she go? There she is.
You are doing just fine, Lisa. I don't remember the date. It was like the beginning of May, I think, was recognized as public service volunteer week or something. And so the city clerk's office wanted to tell you all thank you for your service to our community, and has put together a recognition bag for you that they had available for that day. So we just need to know if you are able to stop by the service center to pick that up. I have it in my office. If you could do that, otherwise I will need to mail them out to all of you. But if you could stop by to pick up yours, that would help with costs.
I can ride my bike over, pick one up.
Whatever works.
That's the most sustainable way I know to get there.
No problem. Or if it's easier, I mean, if it works better for you, for me to mail it, we can do that too.
Heather, can you just either tell us or send the information on where we would need to go to pick that up?
Yes, I'll include that in this grand email that you all are sending me information for.
And I assume there'll be a big fat check in the package as well.
You know, it will have lots of zeros.
Yeah, I don't know if Charles can carry all the money on his bike. He might want to.
As
It
long
might
as all
be-
those, make sure the zeros are after the decimal point though.
It might be comically large and say not to be redeemed for actual value or something.
Right.
But
I think it's monopoly money. Just kidding. Not monetary, but we want to say thank you anyway.
Thanks. I think you're done, Lisa.
Thank
Yes,
you,
Charles.
baby dot.
Sorry, I tried to raise my hand earlier and I missed the opportunity, but just a quick question, Lisa, about the urban temperature measurement program. Did anyone look into seeing if we could get a satellite-based service to do this for us? So Landsat, there's several Landsat satellites that have a remote infrared sensing on them, and they have relatively high resolution, and they have tracked temperatures and urban thermal islands and all kinds of things like that. There's been a lot of publications on that, but I don't know what the cost is, but maybe it's reasonable and could be competitive with doing it more manually?
That's a great question, and I don't think we did, but we already are under contract for this project.
Okay.
So, and there's also a whole, community engagement component that's rolled into that as well. So obviously we've had a harder time getting folks to volunteer, but there's a whole second piece of that is once we have that information, we have a whole stakeholder engagement, community engagement component to have conversations around what's the data saying and how do we develop really community-driven cooling solutions. And that's all rolled into that contract. But that's a great question. I will look into that further because that is something that I think over time, as we are doing different things to mitigate extreme heat, obviously we are expecting the temperature to rise as well. That might be a really good resource for us to use to calculate, you know, are we having an impact or are we not? So thanks for bringing that up. I'll look into that.
Yeah, because just the idea of getting enough data that's collected in a relatively uniform way, and over enough data so that you can basically interpret it, and it's not just, you know, snapshots that end up being more like artifacts. That can be really useful. But yeah, something to look into. I could send you some papers if you're interested in some of the different publications that have used these systems. And
yeah, if you have that, please send it to me. I definitely would want to look and see what is the resolution that's available to those for sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, Jim.
And I'm pulling this out of a seminar from years ago, but I think one of the issues that you run into with those is that a lot of the satellite measurements average over the ray path of whatever it is going down to measure. So it's very difficult to do things about like, tree canopy can be very difficult to handle, but then also it's difficult to see how higher air temperatures and the actual temperatures people live at can be differentiated. But again, that's like, I'm pulling that out of a seminar from a long time ago, so I don't.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. We've reached items from the board, that section in our agenda. Is there anything that anyone on the board has to bring up? Great. Are there any items from council? Marcia.
Not really. Congratulations to Charles for being reappointed to this board. And we are upcoming. There are some reconsiderations on some of our water management ordinances, but I don't have any idea how they're going to come out yet. So watch and see.
Great, thank you.
And Charles, you will get formal notification of that from the clerk's office later this week. Sorry
Got
about
it.
that.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but I thought today might be my last meeting. Thanks, Marcia. Good to know.
Happy to have you. Okay.
I did have one other thing. I'm sorry.
Okay, Lisa.
I guess I wasn't ready to be done. I wanted to let you all know that the universal recycling ordinance went to council last night for first reading and was approved. So it will go on second reading on July 11th, and there will be a public hearing process for that. So we will keep you apprised of that. And we also, our sustainability coordinator that is hired to focus on zero waste initiatives just started yesterday. So just in time to hit the ground running with that. And I'm sure you'll get a chance to meet her. Her name is Nicole. She'll probably jump in from time to time to chat with you all. So just wanted to give a quick update on that.
Great news. Thanks. All right. I will call everyone's attention to your board packet and the email correspondence that is there. Please do read through it. And with that, we've reached the end of our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
In a second.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy solstice.
Happy solstice.
Long day, long day.
Thank you, everybody. Lisa, thank you very much for your presentations.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I-
everyone.
I think-
Bye-bye.